back to Young Heretics Conversations. This is our Friday interview series. Every now and then, I like to take a break from sticking my nose into old books. I like to lift my head up from whatever musty library I happen to be in and look out into the world and talk to people, friends, or people whose work I admire, and just get a sense for what's going on out there in the world that can give us hope. You know, if you listen to this show, I'm a big hope pill enjoyer. I am your average hope advocate because people talk all the time now about pessimism and optimism. Do you think that the world is doomed? Do you think the country is doomed? Or do you think everything's going to be okay? And as a student of history and the scholar of the great books, I know that nobody ever knows what's happening in the future. You cannot write history in the present tense, and you can't predict what's going to come down the line. So both pessimism and optimism are kind of misguided. They're predictions about something you do not know about, and they lead to all sorts of actionable problems. Like if you're a pessimist, you will probably retreat from life because nothing matters and why do anything at all. If you're an optimist, you might get complacent because everything's going to be fine. So why would you worry? Why would you try to fix things? Neither of those seems helpful. And pessimism, especially, which is an addiction of the conservative movement, pessimism is a temptation to despair, which I believe is a sin. On the other hand, hope is a virtue. It's one of the three Christian virtues that Christianity added to the catalog. If we had the cardinal virtues of the classical world, faith, hope, and love were the three additional virtues that Christianity really emphasized. So hope, which is the assurance of things not seen, the belief that there is a possibility of goodness and that God is good and is acting in the world, that's to me what I'm always looking for. Where can I find hope? And my guest today is a really interesting person in that respect. Her name's Isabel Brown. She's an independent content creator, and she has a book called The End of the Alphabet coming out, which makes an argument that will shock and surprise those pessimists out there. And I know I have some listeners that kind of tend toward the pessimist side of things, so that this will be good for you to hear. If you're like me and you are ancient and you're a millennial, you go on Twitter, which is our kind of platform of choice, and you'll see these clips from TikTok of blue-haired LGBTQIA plus identifying 20-year-olds or college students, high school students, and they're crying in their car and they're screaming and they're saying bizarre jargon that nobody understands about the, like, you know, identifying as a demon or as a cat or whatever. And some of this is, you know, perennial. The older generations always react in horror to the younger generations, but some of it seems like part and parcel of the crazy cultural revolution we've been living through. And people say, oh, like the culture is lost, the future is lost. Young people we've already lost the fight for the future because young people are so leftist, so liberal. And Isabel has a totally different take on this. She thinks that culturally speaking, Gen Z is actually trending conservative for reasons that have to do with some of the stuff we've talked about on the show, with the impulse to rebel against woke orthodoxy and the desire to kind of establish some sort of civilizational order that doesn't just destroy and psychologically deform you and everyone around you. So I was really interested to talk to Isabel because, you know, this is one of the areas that we really want to have hope, or to try to find hope. How can the future of the country, of the world, of the West look like something other than blue-haired people crying in their car seat? And Isabel has a lot of both statistically rigorous, but also, I think, really kind of intellectually interesting arguments about why we might be able to have hope in the future and in Gen Z in particular. So let's bring her on. Here's Isabel Brown. Okay, so usually when I have guests onto this show, I have to reassure them that the young in the Young Heretics title just refers to spiritual age. Like, you don't actually have to be young to be a guest on Young Heretics. But this time I feel like I have to reassure myself with that line because my guest today makes me feel very, very old. Her name is Isabel Brown. She's an independent content creator with a new book coming out called The End of the Alphabet. And as I understand it, this is a book about how Gen Z can help lead the charge against the alphabet revolution, wokeness, whatever you want to call it. Isabel, did I get that basically right?
Indeed, Spencer, and more. Really, that Gen Z has this opportunity right now in a revolutionary moment in 2024 to save our country from utter destruction. And it's exciting to see the direction we're already taking.
Yeah, tell me about the direction that we're already taking. Because as I mentioned, I'm ancient. I'm one of the yawn venerable millennials. And I have seen a lot of stuff. I mean, this is kind of a perennial. Everybody always complains about the younger generation, but I've seen a lot of stuff about how Gen Z is actually super woke and all these TikTok, excerpts that are constantly being passed around on something called Twitter X, which is where we old people tend to gather and kind of look over the fence at TikTok, and we'll see these clips that are, crazy blue-haired Gen Z people that make us feel very afraid. Can you say something to sort of reassure the older folks and explain why it is you think that Gen Z in particular actually has a hopeful opportunity here?
Well, let me just say first, thank you for your service as a millennial because I feel like millennial hatred walked so that Gen Z hatred could run. Honestly, it is just crazy to me how much there's been this barrage of a narrative put forward by the mainstream media and, in particular, people older than us in the political realm that Gen Z is this overwhelmingly woke, lost cause, blue hair, scream at the sky, entitled, lazy, socialist, stupid generation that doesn't deserve a seat at the table in the direction our country is moving forward because we've all been poisoned by the left. And in reality, while you might see insane clips put out by the incredible libs of TikTok who's doing the Lord's work every day, I do really believe this, on X or
Amen.
Twitter or Instagram or Facebook from the dreaded TikTok of what all the crazy Gen Zers are doing, that's really a tiny minority of the values that espouse our generation and that our generation is fighting for every day. It's shocking, I think, for many people when I go on Fox News or Newsmax or do some print media or even the radio, when I tell people that Generation Z is actually the most culturally conservative generation America has seen since World War II. It's starting to
Wow.
come about politically as well with political conservatism, but from a cultural conservative standpoint, Generation Z is redefining traditional values with a new age spin every single day. And what do I mean by that? It follows the exact same pattern of behavior we've seen from every generation throughout human history, that young people always want to do one thing, and that is rebel against the people who came before them. Historically, in America's last several decades, to be a rebellious punk rock countercultural young adult meant, I don't know, covering your body in a million tattoos and spiky hair and leather jackets in a punk rock band and sticking it to the man. But now, sticking it to the man and people in positions of power and culture literally means getting married, going to church on Sunday, eating real food instead of stuff grown in a lab or with seed oils. It means moving out of big cities into more suburban and rural areas to have an experience of the white picket fence version for our generation and exploring the great outdoors. It means rejecting this idea that you need a 4-year degree in, I don't know, underwater lesbian basket weaving in order to be successful in American corporate circles. And we
What are
are
you saying
instead
about my
skipping
college experience there, Isabel? I feel very
we're
personally
instead
attacked.
skipping ahead to being CEO on day one, with 62% of us already starting our own businesses. We're getting our media from alternative sources like TikTok, and I'd be excited to talk about that on the podcast today. But we're rejecting this idea that we have to automatically trust public institutions that have been selling us on a narrative and on talking points rather than objective truth. And I think more than anything, we're hungry for a sense of purpose. Again, we're looking for something bigger than the emptiness leftist authoritarianism dominating culture has to offer us. And I think that's going to pop up in politics in a very exciting way, too.
Okay, this is all so interesting to me. I have so many questions because I talk a lot on this show about just how boring wokeness is, and that's true at a big picture historical level, that it really represents actually a return to some very primitive ideas from the ancient world more than
Hmm.
anything. But then it's true in the more immediate sense that you're talking about, which is that, of course, when a new generation comes of age, and we should say that Gen Z, right? You guys are in your 20s now. Is that about right?
Yeah, important definition always to
Right.
provide. I was born in 1997. Most people agree that's the first year of Gen Z. So the oldest of us will be 27 this year, and it goes
Yeah.
down to those born in 2012. So we're talking about 13, 14-year-olds. Everybody after that is called Gen Alpha, and they need all the prayers we can get because they are the children of millennials. So if you're listening to this, please keep them in your
Oh
thoughts.
my gosh, thoughts and prayers. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry, but okay, yeah. So you guys are, so it's just perfect age to really be striking out on your own, older than a teenager, so not just wildly flailing around, but still trying to make a name for yourself, form this new identity. And yeah, I was watching the Oscars just the other night, and on the one hand, you've got these kind of interesting new movies, I think, that have been made in the past year. And then on the other hand, you have this culture, this incredibly suffocating culture of Hollywood
Mm.
and the land acknowledgments and the, weird demographic requirements that just seem like if you were an artist, you would want to be running as fast as possible in the opposite direction. So that's kind of what you're saying culturally about Gen Z. What, if anything, is holding them back politically? Because there's a difference, right, between that cultural lifestyle rebellion, and that doesn't necessarily translate. I can see a lot of reasons why that wouldn't translate into
Mm.
like voting Republican or whatever. Is there a barrier there?
I think there is, but interestingly, we're still trending in the right direction, even though
Hmm.
people are trying to get you to buy into this idea that Gen Z is this blue tsunami that is a one sided voting monolith, because we're really
Hmm.
not. I started voting in 2016, and it's really fascinating when you study exit polling from youth voter behavior in the 2018 election, in 2020, in 2022. And I'm really curious what happens in November. The
Hmm.
idea that Gen Z is trending towards conservative politicians, conservative ballot initiatives, conservative causes in general, and more toward the Republican Party is the proof is in the pudding. I mean, it's fascinating. If you look at all of the exit polling and the data, the line looks like a y equals mx plus b from your elementary school algebra class sample graph, that we are going in a straight line, more Republican, more conservative with every single election. But you also have to keep in mind most Gen Zers are still teenagers. They're still waiting to register to vote. They're still waiting to cast their first ballot, and the demographics of age breakdown within even our own generation suggest that the younger cohort of us are far more conservative than even the older cohort of us. So I think it takes time to catch up, but that's also not a new idea, right? It was the late great Andrew Breitbart that says politics is always downstream from culture, and if you want to change who's running for president, if you want to change what bills are being debated in Congress this week, if you want to change what's happening on the presidential debate stage, it has to start with changing dating norms and what's happening in
Hmm.
schools and the entertainment industry. And I think that's exactly what we're doing every single day. So it'll just take a couple of years to catch up.
Hmm. Yeah, just set your watches. I mean, this is kind of a major factor in this upcoming election that Biden is losing young voters. I mean, he
Absolutely.
himself, right, is practically on death's door, and there's like, yeah. So that's an interesting kind of corollary to what you're saying. You mentioned something that I have been wanting to ask you about, which is dating norms. Um, I saw a survey a while back that made a big splash from the University of Michigan. I think this was 2022, that high school boys, so younger than the demographic we're talking about, high school boys are twice as likely to identify as conservative than high school girls, and it's still small kind of percentages overall because most people at that age don't identify with any kind of political affiliation. But I'm wondering if there is a gender dynamic here in
Mm-hmm.
the data or in your experience that has to do with some of the like larger culture wars around men and women and all of that. Is there anything interesting going on there?
In my experience, yes. And there's actually been several follow up studies to that one you just mentioned, suggesting that teenage boys are the most conservative they've ever been since the 1950s. So young
Wow.
men
Yeah.
are getting it. They are completely waking up to the barrage of indoctrination in their high school classrooms. By the time they get to college, they do not have any time of day for
Hmm.
leftist indoctrination, and they know exactly what they believe. And I think a lot of that has to do with incredible voices that have really broken through the barrier of media tailored towards men. Look at Jordan Peterson, look at a Ben Shapiro or a Charlie Kirk. This has been an infrastructure for so long that has really worked with men, and the hard line, this is truth, this is not, facts don't care about your feelings mantra has worked incredibly well for young men. So I think we're absolutely on the right train there. Different studies are coming out saying young women, teenage girls, are overwhelmingly leftist. But I don't know how much that's translating culturally versus politically, because in my experience, if you start dumbing down and take away the partisan labels, all of the political controversy with all of this, and you take cultural lifestyle down to taking hormonal birth control or dating apps or what's going on with our careers, and do we really want to work for a big company that's going to just pay for us to get an abortion out of state instead of do something a little bit more meaningful with our time or give something back more positive to society? It's fascinating to see what's happening at that cultural level. So let's start at the beginning. Birth control. Young women everywhere are quitting hormonal birth control in droves, like all throwing it in the trash can, regardless of where you fall on the partisan political spectrum. And I was one of those people. I was a Gen Zer that was told you have to take this for your skin, you have to take this for your overall health, even if it has nothing to do with your relationship status. This magic thing is going to make your life so much better. And every single healthcare provider in my life told me I had to keep doing this for 9 years until I finally read a book suggesting that birth control makes you really anxious and depressed and might even contribute to suicidality, which when you look at the data, 1 in 3 teenage girls seriously contemplated taking her own life in 2021 in America. And I wonder how much of that has to do with birth control, that we're being attracted to more feminine men and that we're changing our lifestyle and our preferences, even in our own dating lives, because our hormone balances are changing in our own brains. So women everywhere are throwing this in the trash can, which is a pretty conservative, culturally, little c, decision to make. Women everywhere are quitting dating apps. There are absolute barrages of headlines right now from Match Group and from their competing organizations and businesses that own most of the dating apps like Tinder and Bumble and Hinge, freaking out about how they're going to retain Gen Z as customers because 90% of our generation says that we've had a horrible experience on dating apps, and most of us are deleting them within the first month because we want to meet somebody the old-fashioned way, IRL, as the kids would say, in real life. So we're saying, we're just tired of doing all this through a screen. And 93% of us still say that we want to get married, which is crazy when you think about the fact that America currently has the lowest marriage rate our country has ever recorded since we began recording them in 1867. So talk about a major cultural backlash and pendulum swing there. So I think it circles back to this idea that politics takes a long time to catch up. I think the attack on masculinity in society and labeling anything associated with manhood as toxic really predated the attack we're seeing on women and femininity today. So it stands to reason that the upswing and the pendulum going back in the other direction would come for men before it comes for women. But we're seeing the exact same line of attack from the left on women today, that you aren't a mother, you're a birthing person, you're not a woman who gets her period, you're a menstruator or a person with a uterus. It's not breastfeeding, it's chest feeding, because anything feminine is evil and outdated and misogynistic. So I think it stands to reason we'll see the exact same pendulum swing towards womanhood and embracing who we really are for women as well, but it'll just take a couple of extra years.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side of, you, actual woman, are really just a menstruating person. The flip side of that is like, here's day 25 of girlhood from that guy, Dylan Mulvaney, I guess. That guy who goes around and flounces about in this exaggerated caricature of womanhood. So, yeah, there's definitely been recently the kind of shift toward attacking women. And we've had a bunch of people on this podcast, like Mary Harrington, Louise Perry, Helen Roy, who have raised this issue that you just emphasized, which is skepticism about hormonal birth control. I think that's enormous because the pill really was, in some ways, like the atom bomb of the sexual revolution. Like it kind of
so well
off.
said. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's like people are realizing that. I have to ask you, because you threw out another statistic that's really encouraging to me. We've had this sort of systematic attack, first on masculinity, then on femininity. And one thing that I was already curious about was like some people seem to have taken that and concluded that just marriage is a bum deal because like men are the problem or women are the problem. So actually we should just go our separate ways essentially. Um, that doesn't sound like as big a concern as maybe that's like more of an internet thing. People that are very online are worried about a manosphere and the and Pearl Davis and whoever, but actually maybe Gen Z is bucking that trend as well.
I'm hopeful that it comes to fruition in our actions, at least in our desire right now. Almost
Mm,
100% of us say that we still want to get married, which is the most encouraging thing that I possibly could have seen come out of our generation. But it's interesting you mentioned the manosphere. I got asked this the other day on my live stream, and it was fascinating for me to wrap my head around both the radical leftist feminist movement and this backlash kind of ultra right alpha male manosphere movement are interestingly saying exactly the same thing right now about marriage. And it's fascinating to
yeah.
witness because one side is telling women men are evil, men hate you, men don't want to provide for you, you don't need a man, you don't need marriage, it's going to just dumb you down to be a commodity essentially, so be independent from that, cut the strings of marriage and you'll be liberated for women. The other side is saying feminism has gone so far in poisoning the minds of women that she's going to take all of your money, she's going to run away from you, she's going to treat you terribly. So the only way for you to be a liberated man is to sleep with as many people as possible, no strings attached. It's to prioritize personal wealth and career development instead of your relationships. And when you take away any sort of color grading or lens that you're looking through on this from a partisan standpoint, the substance is exactly the same. And I think it's fascinating to see people diagnose a lot of problems in society appropriately, that we do have very broken relationships. We do have distorted views of gender roles and manhood and womanhood. But the problems that they're correctly diagnosing, they're providing completely the wrong solution. And we're
Mm-hmm.
echoing and mirroring each other in the process, left and right.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just writing about this actually. Like, I don't know if using this slang term will earn me like street cred among the Gen Z listeners or not. Maybe this isn't Gen Z slang at all, but I feel like men and women collectively like kind of got the ick for each other in this very weird way. You know that there's the things about the opposite sex that are supposed to be kind of charming and
Hmm.
appealing, like the fact that women have this like in the aggregate can be more emotional, or that men can be more kind of like analytical. All this stuff that we're constantly saying about each other in this gentle teasing way suddenly became, it's like this is actually the problem with the world.
Yeah.
um and you said something about getting off of screens that I think might be really important. That a lot of this strikes me as a consequence of like theorizing about people in general, mediated by the internet, as opposed to actually talking to human beings face to face. Is Gen Z rebelling against screens as well? And maybe you can talk also about that alternative media dimension of it. That there's like a lot more kind of access to information now through
Hmm.
screens, but maybe that's a mixed blessing.
Yes and no, I think.
Okay.
Ultimately, if we look at 2020, that was such a turning point for redefining everything in terms of reality, let alone politics or our relationships, but just how the world functioned for so many different aspects of our lives. And most Gen Zers were smack dab in the middle of very important lifestyle moments and uh, commemorative moments in your timeline of life in America during that
Yeah.
crazy cultural and technological revolution. My sister, for example, graduated from high school in 2020. And instead of getting to have the experience of walking across the stage and getting your diploma, we had a drive through graduation at her Catholic high school where the
Did you at
priest
least get a
took a
Big Mac? Could you kind of get it
pretty
with
much,
fries?
yeah.
Yeah.
It was the saddest thing I've ever experienced. I graduated from grad school a week before on Zoom in our family's living room, but I'd had graduations before. It was sad and silly and whatever. But watching my 18-year-old sister at the time get in the car, us drive through our high school campus. We went to a Catholic school, so we rolled down the window, and the priest used a little squirt gun to spray holy water into the car, and then they handed you your diploma, and you
This
left.
isn't real.
It's
This didn't
real. It's
happen.
totally
Oh
real.
my
And
god.
it is shocking to me the level
Yeah.
of cultural development that most of our generation missed out on because everything had to be on here for our own safety. And we saw that with school, obviously, which really pulled the veil back for college students in particular, that we don't want to spend $250,000 to watch a YouTube video, essentially, that we could go watch for free or look all
Yeah.
of this stuff up on our own time. What a huge waste of my resources and my time to sit at my desk and watch my professor fall asleep on Zoom. There's nothing interesting about that. People saw that
Yeah.
in their jobs. For the oldest among us that had already graduated from college, all of a sudden our jobs were on Zoom. Our hangout sessions with our friends were on FaceTime. Our dating was through a screen. Our intimacy, really since 2020 with the pornography industry's rise, has been through a screen. Our entertainment has all been through a screen. And it's been this really interesting, eye-opening opportunity, I think, for our generation, that technology is amazing and it's innovative and it's bringing humanity into real progress in a progressive society, with what that literally means in so many different ways, but it can't replace real human connection. And so if you survey Gen Zers about their college experience, nobody wants remote learning anymore and nobody wants to
Yeah.
learn through Zoom. If you ask them about their jobs, we actually like working in person and we like working for ourselves, which I think is why so many of us started our own businesses over the last several years, because we like setting our own rules for the workplace, but still having an intimate in-person physical connection with all of that. And we're deleting our dating apps. We're trying to hang up the screen that way because we're really wanting that tangible, I can touch you connection with a real person that just can't be replicated through a screen. But on the flip side, I think we're really seeing an opportunity to use what is behind our screens for good. And I see most of that with social media. Obviously, the vast majority of news that our generation consumes is all through social media. Well, upwards of 80-90% of us are not watching TV. We're not reading even headlines on a Twitter post. We're not reading newspaper articles or magazine articles. We're watching a 15-second video on TikTok or a 90-second reel on Instagram to say what an hour of TV programming would tell us is going on in the world. And we're participating in the creation of that ourselves because we're realizing that, above all else, what we've been missing from society since 2020 is real authenticity in what we're seeing behind our screens. Real people being honest, telling the truth, being willing to mess up every once in a while, maybe talking to you about what's going on in the world while they're putting their makeup on over the bathroom counter in the morning, or talking about dating norms while crying in the passenger seat of their car after a bad date. It seems so silly, but breaking that fourth wall, so to speak, when we're bringing more authenticity into the world of news, of information, of cultural norms and commentary using social media, I think has been this vehicle for goodness and honesty and truth again for our generation, that so many people say, well, they're just glued to their screens all the time. They're just consuming all this crazy information all
Yeah.
the time. But in reality, we're contributing to it instead.
This is a lot of this is really kind of core to the mission of this show as well. You know, I sometimes talk about the experience of starting a podcast about, I mean, basically, I talk about Aristotle. You know, I mean, this is like a show about the things that you would think would be quite boring and not play well on the internet. And I was personally quite shocked that this thing I did is kind of a like, you know, a passion project, something to entertain myself, turned out to have like there was real hunger on the other side of it. And I think it does have to do with this that crucial dividing line, not between screen and not screen, but between authentic and inauthentic. And you know, I call this show now the classical education you didn't know you were missing, because it turns out actually, like, you know, good stuff still is really good, and like Aristotle is actually amazing. But what people are reacting against is like the Claudine gaze of the world, that they see these authority figures step up and say, you pay us through the nose, go into debt for the rest of your life, and we'll give you a rubber stamp that means what? That you know how to like plagiarize other people and repeat pious nonsense about like that just doesn't sound like a good deal anymore. And it would seem shocking to me if Gen Z weren't kind of figuring it out. And what you're saying kind of, I guess, resonates with my experience as well of just talking online, that it's less about are we using the evil, bad demon tech or not, and more about are we using it to really kind of break through some of this inauthenticity or just to reify it. I have to ask you before I let you go one question, and it's clear to me that you've got a real grasp on the statistics here. So I'm sure the minute I cite the statistic, you're going to tell me why it's not. It doesn't say what it looks like it says. But your book is called "The End of the Alphabet," and it immediately puts me in mind of these Gallup polls that are always coming out about how much of Gen Z is identifying
Hmm.
as LGBT, which to me is like irrespective of what you think about any one of the kinds of individual represented by those letters, like to identify as LGBTQ is like unequivocally a bad thing. It's not actually about sex. It's more about
Mhm.
this bizarre view of men and women that we've kind of been talking about, and this like political commitment. But yeah, so here's a 2021 survey, I guess, that came out. Then it was publicized in 2022 that 20% of Gen Z adults are identifying as LGBTQ. There have been others as well. Tell me about this. Like, how real is that, and is that trend worrisome to you?
I'm so glad that you brought up this statistic, Spencer, because
Okay.
I actually write about this one quite extensively in my book. And it's funny that you say the idea of the end of the alphabet, the title of my book, is bringing to mind the alphabet people. That was
Yeah.
never my intention with the
Oh,
title
you're
of this book,
kidding.
but you are the third person in the podcast world that has asked me that.
Yeah.
Michael Knowles said, I'm assuming it's like a call to exterminate all the LGBT people. And I said, no, not really. But it's been funny to see that as like a secondary nature of this, because maybe that's the biggest bad rap that our generation gets, that we are
Right.
this, in my words, how I say it in the book, super gay, like super trans generation, which everybody likes to say. And obviously the data supports that. That Gallup poll that you mentioned is frightening, that just came out a few years ago, saying that year over year, with every single generation, we are seeing a doubling of the number of people who are identifying as LGBTQ. So what used to be 1% of the population for 4 generations ago has turned into 1 in 5 Gen Zers self-identifying as LGBTQ plus. And when you read that
Hmm.
on face value, it's horrifying. And I think what immediately comes to mind is the people like Dylan Mulvaney that you see on your TikTok feed, or the stories of kids peeing in litter boxes in their middle schools in Oklahoma, like the most asinine, insane versions of these stories. But the more I did research into it and the more I started thinking about it, I kept coming back to the little plus sign at the end of
Mm.
LGBTQ plus. And the more that we've
Right.
normalized identities that never existed 6 months ago or a year ago or 5 years ago or a decade ago, the more I've realized that not really are we changing the percentage of people identifying as part of this community. We're broadening the parameters of the community at large. So this is problem number one. Problem number two is that it's become a cultural fad and this trendy, in vogue thing to change your gender, even if you're not really changing your gender. So I'll come back to that. But starting at broadening the parameters, when you talk about the plus sign, you might be talking about somebody who identifies as demisexual. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term before, Spencer.
Oh, please. Oh, Isabel. Yeah, yeah. I'm not that out of touch. Yes, I know about all of these identities, and there. Yeah,
Right.
some of them
So
are just
so
like tags.
demisexual, DEMI, literally translates is defined by experts in the LGBTQ community as someone who is sexually attracted to some people, but not all people, but especially people that you have a romantic connection with. So like literally every human
It's
being
like
could identify as demisexual, and there's 8,000 other labels that didn't exist 6 months ago that people are just making up on the spot to have something to hold on to, with a letter next to their name or a new pronoun that's ridiculous but doesn't really exist. And I think that's hyperinflating a lot of those numbers, but people want to
mm,
feel like they're a part of this culturally in vogue, progressive, trendy thing that all of their friends are a part of. Which then brings me to the next problem with this. Abigail Shrier writes about this quite frequently, especially in her book Irreversible Damage, which is incredible, and I could not put it down when I read it, that especially for teenage girls, gender transition has become what eating disorders were in the 1990s, or what
right.
suicide clusters were, and group depression with your friend group in the early 2000s at the high school level. Now we're seeing clusters of friend groups the exact same way we saw with eating disorders and with suicides throughout the last several decades, have the first friend say, I don't really want to be a girl anymore, but I also don't think I really want to be a boy. But being a girl sucks. And if you've ever been a teenage girl, it sucks and everybody hates it. And it's the worst few years of your life. So I'm just going to be neither. And I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to cut my hair and wear different clothes and go by a different name and maybe take a few pills. And that part's not great. But for the most part, I won't even do anything dramatic about it. I'm just going to start identifying as something else. And then you're seeing the entire friend group rally around it when none of these girls have any history of gender dysphoria. They certainly don't exhibit any signs of this at home with their families. And so it comes as a total shock to parents, but then the parents are reinforced by the school guidance counselors, the pediatrician, every trusted adult in their lives that they have to approve and affirm this direction for their daughter, or their daughter is going to kill themselves. Maybe nobody has been as outspoken about this as Chloe Cole, and she's absolutely phenomenal in sharing her experience with gender transition and now detransitioning. But literally every single adult in her life, after she randomly got the idea, I don't think I want to be a girl, being a girl sucks, everybody said, would you rather have an alive son or a dead daughter, to her parents? So that obviously is inflating a lot of this stuff artificially as well, because we're talking about children and teenagers, which sadly is the number one target for who these people are trying so desperately to transition. But I don't really think 20% of our generation is LGBTQ plus. I think 20% of teenagers are wearing different clothes and cutting their hair and going by a different name, or saying I'm demisexual because I need a label in order to culturally fit in, but it's going to go out of fashion just as quickly as it came into it.
Yeah, the demisexual label, even in some cases like the bisexual or the queer label, they kind of remind me of this generation's version of like a Free Tibet bumper sticker. Like it's a
Yes.
badge of honor that doesn't cost you anything. You can never do anything about it. It means nothing, but you get to be part of an in crowd. And a lot of those incentives will dissipate if, in fact, as you indicate, like the culture at large sort of
Mm-hmm.
shifts away from that, gets bored of it. I think your book will be a big part of that. Clearly, what you're doing is a big part of that, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for coming on. The book is called "The End of the Alphabet" by Isabel Brown. Isabel, tell people where they can get it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. First of all, I've been a huge fan of the podcast for a long time, so very fun to join you. The End of the
Terrific.
Alphabet: How Gen Z Can Save America officially hits shelves on March 19th, and you can get it anywhere books are sold. I know we all hate on Amazon lately because they haven't been the best, but if you ever want to support your favorite author, please buy a book on Amazon. It's the easiest way to get people on bestseller lists, and it gets it to your house faster than ever.
Yes, indeed. Okay, terrific. Well, I'm looking forward to the launch and best of luck as you make the rounds. Thanks again, Isabel.
Thank you.